everybody, and welcome to my podcast. Today, I'm here with April Dunford. So, April is a positioning consultant, entrepreneur, board member, angel investor, and advisor for dozens of businesses. With 25 years of experience as an executive in a series of 7 successful technology startups and 3 global tech giants, April is a product positioning expert. That's why in this episode, we will talk about how to position a business and how to make customers go from what to wow. Hello, April, and thank you for accepting my invitation.
Hey, it's so cool to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, first of all, your name is directly connected with the term positioning. You wrote a book about product positioning called Obviously Awesome. And now you're in a tour of promoting your book. So tell me about the tipping point of your career when you figure out that this is your niche and what you're good at.
Yeah, it's kind of a long, winding road. So, I ended up doing marketing out of engineering. Like I studied engineering in school, but I got a job at a startup in the marketing department after I graduated. That startup got acquired, my boss left, and I was kind of in the right place at the right time, and I took over the group. And then there I was. I'm a marketer now, even though back then I didn't really know anything about marketing. So I spent a lot of time trying to learn it. So I took a lot of courses and I read a lot of books, and I had very smart people on my team that were teaching me. And one thing that kept coming back over and over again was this concept of positioning as kind of the foundation of everything we did in marketing and sales. Like before we could make a campaign, before we could do go-to-market strategy, before we could create messaging or branding, we had to kind of figure out this fundamental positioning, which was who are our real competitors? Why are we different? Why are we better? Who exactly are we trying to go after as our best target customers? And more importantly, what market are we actually in? And until I had those answers, it was very difficult for us to reliably, scalably build marketing programs. So right at the beginning, I figured out, okay, well, this positioning thing is really, really important. I wonder how we do it. And so I kept taking these classes and reading books. And if you study positioning, there's a book that you will come across called Positioning: The Battle for Your Mind by these 2 guys, Jack Trout, Al Ries. And that book does an amazing job of explaining what positioning is. What it doesn't do is tell you how to do it. So what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to call those guys, and they run an agency and they're going to do it for you. And this book was written in 1982. So before the internet. And so, when I finally came across it, it was 10, 15 years after the book has been written. And I'm working at a little startup, but I'm like, well, that's a neat concept, positioning, but I still have no clue how to do it. I can't afford to hire you guys because I'm a little startup, and I have no clue how to do this. How do people actually get it done? So I kept talking to other smart marketers, and the conclusion I came to was nobody really had a methodology. We were all kind of making it up as we went along. So I spent maybe 10 years internally, while I was running marketing teams inside companies, experimenting with different ways of doing it until I finally came up with something that I thought worked for me. And then I used that on my own teams for 10 years. And then recently, the last 3-4 years, I've switched to consulting. And basically, I'm teaching people my methodology of how to actually get it done, because there seems to be a giant gap in everyone's knowledge around positioning when it comes to actual execution of it.
So you said that positioning, when you start thinking about positioning, you start with questions. But I believe that when you want to know the right answer, you have to put the right question. So
Yeah.
What are the right questions you have to start with when you want to understand your brand position?
Yeah. So the way positioning works, it's really interesting. Like if you examine positioning, um, you can really break positioning up into 5 component pieces. And the component pieces are your market category, or what market do you play in, what your competitive alternatives are,
Mm-hmm.
what your unique differentiated features are, what your differentiated value is. So what can you do for customers? And the last one is what's your customer segmentation, or the ideal customers you want to go after. Those are the 5 pieces. But when you study positioning, one of the first things you realize is the 5 pieces are all interconnected and related to each other. So if I say, well, let's pick one of them, like value. So what is the value that your product delivers to customers? Well, that unique value is completely dependent on the unique features of your product. But the unique features of your product are only unique when compared to an alternative. So those things are all related. And then if I say, well, what's my ideal customer profile? My best customers are the people that really, really care a lot about the value I can deliver. So those things are connected. And then market category is really another way of saying, how do I make the value I deliver obvious to the people I'm trying to go after? And that's my,
Mm-hmm.
market context. So if everything's all related to each other, where do you start? And that troubled me for a long time, because for a long time I didn't think there was a natural starting point. But what I eventually realized is if we don't start with competitive comparables, then we'll get positioning that's nice, it looks good, it sounds good, but it doesn't necessarily win in the market because it's not necessarily differentiated from the other ways people could solve the problem. So you actually have to start with competition. So in my methodology, where we start is we start by looking at your happiest customers. So you look at the customers that love you the most, the customers that don't churn on you, the customers that recommend you, and you examine what they perceive to be the competitive alternatives to what you do. So it's another way of asking your customers, hey, like, what were you had this problem before you started using our stuff? How were you solving this problem before? Another way of asking the question is to say, look, if we shut down this product tomorrow, what would you do? So
Mm.
how would you, we're not an option anymore. What would you do? And often internally, what we think the answers to those questions are very different from what a customer would say. So often when I go to a startup and I say, who do you compete with? They'll say, oh, we have all these little startups we compete with. And they'll list a bunch of little startups that do what they do. And then they'll say, well, that's our competition. And then I'll say, well, what makes you different? And they'll say, oh, well, what makes us different is we're easier to use, because those other startups, it takes 15 clicks to do this thing, but with ours, it's only 1 click. And so ease of use is our big thing. But then you go to the customers and you say, hey, customer, how are you solving this problem before? Or what would you do if this product didn't exist anymore? And often the customer will say, I just use a spreadsheet. Or I'll just hire an intern to do
Mm.
it. And so if you have the wrong competitive comparable, then everything else you do downstream in your positioning will also be wrong. So, in the case of a typical startup will tell me, oh, it's ease of use, but you are never going to win against Excel or the intern on ease of use, ever.
Mm. Mm.
So that can't be your thing that makes you different. Now, there's lots of reasons why you don't want to use Excel or an intern. Like, the intern makes a lot of mistakes. The intern has to enter in the data multiple times, and every single time you might have a problem with that. You have to train a new intern every time you get one. There's limits to what you can do in Excel, for example, but you need to understand what the comparable is. So the beginning of this, like the questions you want to ask yourself are, what am I actually comparing? What are customers actually comparing my product to? So what are my actual competitive alternatives? And then what are my unique differentiating features against that? And then what is the value that those features deliver? And that'll get me to my value proposition stuff. And then once I have that value, then I can say, okay, there's lots of companies out in the world that might want to buy my stuff because they want that value. But there are some companies that put an incredibly high price on that value and really, really care a lot about that value. And those are your actual best fit customers.
Hmm.
So that's
That's,
kind of how you have to flow this stuff in positioning.
that's very interesting and also accurate to understand how you start how you start asking yourself these questions that get you to the real value proposition.
Right.
When I started doing the research and starting understanding the term positioning, I heard a lot about brand positioning, product positioning, and business positioning. So,
Yeah.
is there any difference between these terms? Like, is there any connection between these terms, or I don't know, people just use these terms because they just want to try and make a point, or I don't know. Like, can you help me explain what positioning really means and how marketers
Yeah.
should really think about positioning a product?
Yeah. So here's my opinion on that. Positioning is tragically misunderstood. Like,
Hmm.
if people really don't get it, it's an old concept, but our understanding of it is very, very shallow. So I have a particular problem with the term brand positioning. That drives me absolutely crazy. There is positioning and there is branding, and those two things are completely separate. Branding is a thing that you cannot do until you understand positioning. Positioning is an input into branding. So if I'm building a brand, the first thing that, let's say I go to a brand agency and I say, hey, we need a new brand. We're building new brand stuff around this product. What's the first thing the branding people are going to ask you? They're going to say, who's your target customer? What's your value proposition? Who's your competition? That's positioning. You can't do branding until you understand positioning. It is an output. Positioning is an input. Then we get to things like product positioning versus business positioning or company positioning, and that's a little different. So in my mind, like, coming back to this idea that I can break positioning down into 5 component pieces: competition, unique features, value, target customers, market category. That's positioning all put together. That gives me positioning. So a good way to define positioning is positioning defines how your product or offering is the best in the world at delivering something that a well-defined set of customers cares a lot about. And that kind of encompasses all the 5 pieces. So you can either, now the positioning itself, if you're a big company, you will have positioning at the product level because you're selling individual products. But you also have positioning at the company level, which is the explanation of, why do you want to do business with us? So if I'm a big company like IBM, I would say, look, you want to do business with IBM, and I would have IBM positioning. But then I would also have positioning for each particular product, because you might just be buying one product at a time. But I have the IBM positioning because, a lot of companies, especially with a big company like IBM, they're not just buying 1 or 2 products from IBM. They're buying a whole bunch of things from IBM, and they want to know why IBM is the best possible partner for them to partner with to do that. So there is a difference between positioning an individual product and positioning a business unit or positioning an entire company. But the definition of positioning doesn't change in those things. It's just different levels of hierarchy or nested positioning. So I actually worked at IBM twice, if you can believe that. But IBM, it was really interesting. If we were selling a product, we always sold IBM first. So we always started by saying, look, we're IBM, and this is why you want to partner with us. And then we would say, and within IBM, I'm in the database group, and here's why you should work with the database group at IBM, and this is why we're amazing at database stuff. And then very specifically, this is why you want to buy your data warehouse with us. And this is, and let me tell you about the positioning for that. And the concept was that the addition of IBM to whatever we were doing made it more valuable. If it didn't, then the idea inside IBM is, look, if we're trying to hide the fact that this is IBM, then we should give this product away and sell it to some other company, because it doesn't belong in our portfolio if saying that being part of IBM isn't valuable. So we always started with the bigger picture positioning and then worked our way down. For startups, if you've got one product, or if you're one product company, then the product positioning and the company positioning is pretty much the same, because you've got nothing else to sell right now. And so you're positioning the company essentially around the product. And there are many, 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 many examples of companies like Slack, for example, that are, there's no difference between Slack the product and Slack the company. The positioning is exactly the same. Other companies, you might have 2 products or 3 products, and you'll have to decide how that positioning works. Sometimes you'll still have a lead product that you expect everyone to buy first, in which case, and for, Salesforce for a long time, it's changed a little bit recently, but for a long time, CRM was really the lead product. You wouldn't buy any other Salesforce products until you were using the Salesforce CRM. So the positioning of Salesforce was very much equivalent to the positioning of the Salesforce CRM offering. Now it's gotten a little bit different. They have many, many, many products. They're a much bigger company, and they have this kind of bigger positioning around SaaS solutions for Salesforce, of which CRM is one of those things. But for the majority of startups, product positioning, company positioning is kind of the same thing. Does that answer your question?
Yes. Yes, it's interesting because you already started talking about the SaaS industry. So I'm working for a company called Banner Snack. So we've been in the design and advertising industry since 2008. But the SaaS industry is highly competitive. It's especially these days. So to find out where to position yourself can definitely be more complicated. So can you tell me how a SaaS company can determine its position on the market in order to be different and stand out today?
Yeah. So it's super important. Like, in fact, all of the markets we operate in are intensely crowded right now. Like, if you look at, last week I was doing a positioning workshop with a company, and we were having a conversation around competitive alternatives in the market space that they play in. And I think we listed 400 competitors. It was ridiculous. Like, they just kept putting up slides and slides and slides. We're like, here's another one, here's 15 more. Oh, if we're in this country, we have all these competitors. It's outrageous. And you think, well, how does a customer ever figure it out? Like, so that's where this concept of being super clear about your differentiation is so important, because customers have so many choices, and they're trying to figure this stuff out. So you have to really, really understand what makes you different and better in order to position yourself. You also need to understand not just what makes you different and better, but what kind of customers care about that. So it's both sides of the equation are super important. I need to know my unique value, my unique features, the thing that makes me really, really different. But I also need to understand who cares about that. And then my job as a marketer is to match those things together. I'm trying to run campaigns and do sales things to get in front of just those people that really, really care. I'm not trying to get everybody. I'm just trying to get my people, because I can win those deals. All the other ones, there's just too much competition. If there isn't a nice fit, I don't even want to be talking to you. I want just the people that really care about my stuff. So that's the first thing. So it's this matchmaking. It's both sides. I got to understand my unique value, and then I got to understand who really cares about that unique value, so that I can be working on the matchmaking in between. So, and that's no different in SaaS as it is in any tech product. It's the same, and products in general, it's the same. Like, we sometimes fall into this trap of, well, I'm operating in a market and it doesn't look all that crowded, but it is. Even if there's not a lot of other SaaS businesses in there, you're still competing with Excel or Word or the intern or do nothing, because this doesn't seem like such a bad problem, actually. And even in those situations, you're really going to have to understand who, like, your product solves a problem. Who feels that problem the most intensely and why? And then I'm going to just go after those people, because it's a waste of time for me to try to sell to anybody else. So all of this stuff is really, really important. So it's important for SaaS businesses when you're in a market where there's hundreds of other comparables, you got to really hone in on what makes you different and better. You got to put the center of every.
Hello.
I'm not targeting everybody. I'm just targeting the people that really care about what I'm good at, because that's the only place I can win.
I bet you have a few favorite big brands that have a strong positioning in the industry. But I want to challenge you to think of small companies that manage to position themselves very well on the market with a limited amount of money invested in brand awareness and advertising. Can you think of a few examples?
Well, this is kind of my bag as a consultant. Is I mainly only work with smaller companies, and I mainly work with companies that have positioning challenges, and so they're in competitive markets. And so there's a handful that I could talk to you about. Like, one that I recently did some work with is a really small company here in Canada, and they're called Level Jump. And they are in the sales enablement SaaS space. The sales enablement SaaS space is so crowded. Oh my gosh. There's literally, like, my first meeting with them, we had this conversation about, like, yeah, okay, so what are the other alternatives in your space? And again, it was dozens of companies. And not only are there lots of alternatives, but there is this intense misunderstanding around what even is sales enablement. Like, people don't even realize what it is. And so it overlaps with all these other categories. Like, is that different than training? Is that different than, sales assisting technologies? And, and how is that different from CRM and other sales tools? And oh my gosh, it's a mess, right? So, but if you look at those folks, like, I believe that the positioning they have right now is very crisp and very clear, and it is very clear who's a good target for them and who isn't. So if you look at what they do, their big differentiator is there are plenty of solutions on the market that you can use to train people. There are some of those solutions are specially designed for training salespeople. None of the solutions on the market do a very good job of measuring whether the training works in a way that's relevant to sales. So the only reason you care about training in sales, like sales enablement, you care about this because you want your sales reps to get up to speed really fast so they can hit quota faster, so they can make their first deal faster, because every day they don't do that, you're losing money. So how do you measure when a sales rep is doing that? For every other sales enablement solution in the market right now, they have no way to measure that. So Level Jump is the only one. They don't do it for everybody. You got to be using Salesforce. But if you're using Salesforce, they are baked right into the Salesforce platform, and they can show you exactly, here's the sales enablement stuff you did with your team, and here's the impact it had on metrics like time to quota, time to first call, time to first deal. That's super differentiated. So when they are positioning their product, their positioning is all around sales enablement that drives sales results. It's sales enablement tied to sales results. It's measurable sales enablement results. When they pitch this thing, they very much are focused on, look, hey, company, you got sales enablement, right? You're doing sales enablement. Like, how do you measure if it's working? And if the company doesn't care about measuring that, then they're not a good target. If they do care about measuring it, then they are. Then you might ask the question, well, doesn't everybody care about measuring that? Well, some companies don't hire a lot of new sales reps. So it doesn't feel like a big pain for them. The ramp time's a little long, no big deal. Some companies that are growing really fast are hiring a lot of sales reps. Some companies have a natural turnover that's quite high in sales reps. So they're constantly hiring a large number of sales reps. Those kind of companies care a lot about measuring whether or not sales enablement is working. So what they've got is a solution that's positioned really tightly around, hey, not only are we going to do sales enablement, I'm going to be able to show you where it's working, where it's not working, whatever, so you can get your reps ramped faster, get them to deals faster. And then on the other side, the company is very cognizant of the kinds of companies we're trying to go after are the ones that really, really care about that fast ramp time. Therefore, this is how we qualify a deal and talk to a deal. So I think right now they do an excellent job of that, and they feel very differentiated in the market, and the growth in what they're doing shows.
Hmm. Well, that's a very good example. So I believe that this is how, and they are also a good example on learning how to differentiate using another differentiator like Salesforce, like how they are using Salesforce to be differentiated in a different platform, in a different
Yeah,
market.
that's right. That's right.
Yeah. So a few months ago, I wrote an article called "Chasing Trends Will Kill Your Marketing Purpose." But now I'm thinking to update the article in "Chasing Trends Will Kill Your Brand Positioning" after this interview. But
well, there's some ways you can use trends. Like, you got to be careful. Like, trends are a thing. Like, I agree with you in general, but there is a smart way to leverage a trend. You just have to be careful.
well, that's my question. Like, can you tell us why marketers and entrepreneurs are chasing trends to make their brand stand out, and what makes them use these trends, and what they should do instead?
Yeah, this is a great question. So first of all, so I've talked a lot about market category, right? So what I mean by market category is like my example of Level Jump, right? Their market category is sales enablement. That's where they fit. And so they could have called themselves sales training, or they could have called themselves something else, but they're sales enablement. You always need to have your product positioned in a market category. Otherwise, people do not understand what the heck you are. Now, in tech, we're super into trends. Like, trends come and we get very excited. Sometimes we get so excited about trends that we mistake it for a market category. And so we start saying, oh, we're an AI tool. And I don't know what an AI tool is. AI, machine learning, all these things, these in a lot of ways you could call these things trends that can be applied across multiple market categories. So saying that you do machine learning doesn't really tell me what you are. It answers a little bit of why you do it. So it's easy to confuse a trend with market category. You can never lose the market category. You got to have that. But if you're firmly positioned in a market category, you can sometimes bring in a relevant trend to help answer the question, why is this important to me as a customer right now? And it helps to give your customers a sense of urgency, or a sense of, not only do I understand what you're all about, which is the market category, but I also understand why I might need to deal with this right now. So an example of this is there's a company that I've worked with in the UK called Redgate Software. They're awesome. They're quite a big company now, like 300 plus employees, totally bootstrapped, never raised any money. They're amazing. But you could argue that the market space they're in is pretty boring. It's it's database tools. They have a suite of like 21 database tools. And each of those tools, is kind of the leader in its little niche. And so they've been selling this stuff for, it's been 10 years or so. And what they've done recently is, a few years back, they started to notice trend-wise that their buyers, because they sell into IT departments, they started to notice that their buyers were talking a lot about doing a DevOps transformation. And that was like the hot thing in IT, starting a few years ago. So everybody was talking about DevOps transformation. And what they realized is that they didn't have a story around DevOps transformation. And as a result, when companies were doing, changes in their IT and big purchases around DevOps transformation, they were kind of left out. And so what they did was they developed a point of view on, why is it important to have databases and data in the middle of your DevOps transformation, which, by the way, it's super important. It's just not a thing that people have really thought about. So who better to teach people about that than them? They're the database tools people. So they developed a point of view on this. They wrote a bunch of papers around it. They started, doing op-ed pieces and giving talks at conferences about database DevOps. And this was very much them tapping into a trend that their customers are already thinking about. Their customers are in the middle of this DevOps transformation. And it answered the question, why is it important for me to think about developer or database tools in the middle of this right now? And so the result for them was this huge uptick in inbound inquiries from clients coming in and saying, I want to look at all your tools, not just one or two of them. I want to look at all of them because I'm in the middle of a DevOps transformation. So the key to bringing in a trend is it's got to be timely. It's got to be super relevant to your buyers at the time. And what it should serve to do is not define what you are, but help people understand, why is this important right now? And I should get on this now instead of delaying this purchase for another quarter because I've got other priorities.
Hmm. Hmm. So I know that you're coming to Romania at the How to Web conference in
I was so
October.
excited.
Yeah.
Next week. Yay.
Is it your first
by
time
the
here in
time by the
Romania?
time this gets published, it won't be. You know what? I went to Romania, gosh, like maybe 15 years ago.
Wow.
It's so long ago. Yeah.
Traveling or business?
It was a business trip, and I literally was there for one day. I flew in. I had one day. I was like, "Yay, Romania!" and I flew out. That was it. Yeah, so I'm excited to come back because I don't think I really experienced Romania the last time. Although this is a quick trip too, so I gotta pack it in. I got like 2 days. So
yeah. What are your expectations from the Romanian startup industry?
well, I've heard a few things. So part of the reason why, when the conference folks called me and asked me to come, part of the reason I said yes is I'm hearing that part of the world, there's a lot of new startups. There's a lot of deep tech startups is what I'm hearing. And I don't know if that's true, but, and that's, I like deep tech stuff. But so, and I've heard that it's growing. So, and I think that conference is maybe a testament to that, and that it's not a small conference, it's a pretty big conference. They've managed to attract a really great bunch of speakers from all over the world. So, I think my impression of it is that it's an up and coming startup space. And so I'd like to go and see what it's all about.
April, before we finish this interview, I have a quick challenge for you. I want you to ask my listeners a question that can challenge them. Like, my audience is formed by people working in the marketing and communication industry. So social media marketers, product marketers, PR people, and all this stuff. So even if they won't be able to answer, it's somewhere, I don't know, on the comment section on social media or something somewhere else, I'm pretty sure it can help them reflect on it, so they can do a better job at the company they work for. So what's your question?
All right, so here's the question. If you're on the marketing side, if you're in marketing, I want you to ask yourself, have you positioned your offering deliberately? Or are you just positioning it because that's the way we've always thought about it? And so what I mean by that is, when you're trying to answer the question, like, who's our best target customer? Do you really know what that is? Or are you just saying, oh, it's small, medium business, because that's what we've always said. That's what we always said that. And, the same thing with what's our differentiated value? How do we define the market that we're in? Have we actually done all of that stuff deliberately? Or are you, as the marketing team, just accepting whatever the company tells you, and they say, hey, yeah, no, this is our target market, this is our value, this is what we're doing? Because my experience is, a lot of the time, particularly in tech companies, the marketing team kind of feels like that's not their job. And so they just take whatever the product team or the CEO or whoever tells them, and it's never been validated. And part of the reason why their marketing programs aren't performing the way they wish they were is because the positioning is actually weak. So The challenge I would put out there is, have you actually done a deliberate job of positioning, or are you just kind of going with the positioning you've got with the assumption that everything's fine?
Well,
That's a hard one.
well, that's like a face palm. But that's a
I'm
really
telling
good
you,
question.
every startup I've ever been in, when I joined the company as the VP marketing, and I asked those questions like, who's our target market? What's our differentiated value? What do we do? It hadn't been examined since the birth of the company. And yet the product had totally evolved. The market had totally evolved. The competitive landscape had totally evolved. And half the time, we'd have a product that everybody on the team would say, this is a database and it's aimed at people with large amounts of data, blah, 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 blah. And I try to run programs against that and couldn't get any results. And then I come back to it and sit in on customer calls, talk to customers, and you'd find out customers don't think of us as a database at all. Customers think about us as a data warehousing tool or a business intelligence tool or something completely different. And no one had ever examined that positioning. Because it had never been examined, the positioning was weak. Because the positioning was weak, I couldn't do my job as the VP marketing. So this default positioning thing is a very, very common problem. And on the marketing side, we often don't challenge it because we just assume somebody else is looking after that. And I would say, I bet you nobody is. But you're feeling the pain, marketing people, because it's garbage in, garbage out. If the positioning is weak, you're never going to be super successful on the marketing side. So it's up to you to figure out whether or not the inputs you're getting are good. And if you suspect they're not, you're going to have to figure out how to fix the positioning, and it's on you because the results are on you.
And I also believe that between these departments, like the customer support, the marketing department, the design department, the product department, should be a natural bridge. They can just bring the value they get from the customer, and they can just use it in their day-to-day work, so they can create a value proposition, a basic position in their customer mind, and also in their day-to-day work.
For sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. April, thank you again. Thank you again for joining my podcast. It was a wonderful talk, and I enjoyed it a lot. For people who want to connect with you, where can they find you? How can they connect with you?
Yeah, so my website is aprildunford.com. It's very easy. I'm on social media everywhere as April Dunford. I'm most active on Twitter, probably. I'm not very good at social media, to tell you the truth, but I'm the most active on Twitter, where I'm at April Dunford. It's pretty easy to find me. You can find me on LinkedIn. Occasionally, I do something there. And you can find me at How to Web next week. I think my talk is on day 2, and I'm first thing in the morning. So that means everybody goes out partying at the end of day 1, and they're going to feel hungover. They still have to come to my talk first thing in the morning, and I expect them to be up front and looking perky.
Can you do a teaser? Can you do like a trailer?
I'm the wake up talk on day 2. Oh my gosh, that's a hard time slot, but I'm gonna do my best to show up and be high energy. Like, okay, people, it's day 2. Let's do this.
with a lot of coffee.
A lot of coffee, like
yeah.
a lot of coffee. Yeah.
What will you talk about?
So in the talk, I'm going to talk a little bit, positioning's my bag. So in the talk, I'm going to talk a bit about how we define positioning. I'm going to give some examples of where we had weak positioning and we managed to turn it into strong positioning. And then I'm going to give everybody an introduction to the methodology, like here's the steps, here's how you do it, and give a couple of examples of companies, startups, SaaS startups specifically, where we went through the steps, and here's where we were before, and here's where we got to afterwards, and here was the result in the business at the end of that. It's going to be awesome.
And combined with this podcast, now they have the entire book. Also with your book, they can do positioning very well.
Yeah, the book is there so that people can, it's my way of writing the methodology down and giving you the handbook so that you can do it yourself. So the book is called Obviously Awesome. You can buy it on Amazon. It's, if you buy the ebook, it's pretty cheap. I think it's like $9, $7 or something. It's like, costs nothing. You'll be fine. But it's like 2 coffees is the equivalent of this book. Yeah, so you can do that. And then, you can buy the book. You can come and see me at How to Web. You can listen to this podcast. I'm all over the place right now.
Awesome. April, thank you again. Thank you again. And keep up your good work.
Oh, thanks. Well, thanks so much for having me on the podcast. I enjoyed it.
It was my pleasure. Thanks. Bye-bye.